And welcome to this edition of Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co host, Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Keith. How are you today?
I'm doing good. I've had a little bit of a cough this week, so I may sound a little funny, but that's all right. We all sound funny every once in a while.
We do, and there's a lot of that going around.
There's a lot of it going around. Today's going to be kind of an interesting, a little bit different than what we normally do. We don't have a guest today, and you're going to do a presentation. Why don't you tell us about the presentation you're planning on doing?
All right, I'll be glad to. I have two good friends that have contributed, well, substantially all of the information I'm going to share today. Dennis Egert and Fred Eiler. And between the two of them, they have more knowledge about the cemeteries in the immediate area of Oak Ridge, the city of Oak Ridge, and especially the Revolutionary War veterans that are buried there. And they were the only ones that I knew that had that sort of information when we started talking about how many there might be in these cemeteries. So they agreed to do a historically speaking column for me. Dennis did most of the writing. Fred helped him a lot. And then we put together a series of a couple of historically speaking columns. And then just a few months ago, I got a call from the Daughters of the American Revolution, the Ocoee chapter, which is down near Cleveland. Mm-hmm. And they had seen those historically speaking columns. By the way, Keith, I'm always amazed at how many people read the Oak Ridge or online that are not in Oak Ridge. Yeah. But I sometimes contact from them, and that was the case here. So they wanted a presentation about it, and I agreed to do that. So what I did was took the information that Dennis had provided, he and Fred, and just put it into a set of slides, just a presentation. And I want to share that with our folks today. There's about 10 of them that are there, and I had no idea until we did this research. So I think it'll be good to get that documented and to let people see another part of the hidden history stories of Oak Ridge. So let me share my screen and we'll get started.
All right, good.
All right. I think that's up now. I usually start presentations regardless of what my subject is about Oak Ridge. I usually use this slide, and I do it for a couple of reasons, but one reason is because of a good friend of mine who is descended from the Yuchi Indians, and David Hackett. And he wants me to tell people that the Yuchis were here on the Clinch River, not the Cherokee. The Cherokee were located to the south. So at his request, I try to tell people that the Yuchi Indians were what were along the Clinch River, and it had been here for a long time. Of course, the Cherokees did do the trading with the white settlers and the treaties that allowed the land to be taken over by the white settlers. And in this presentation, you're going to see that some of that settlement was taking place prior to the treaties. So they were actually on land that had, and they were selling land that had not been agreed to in a treaty. But at any rate, the valleys and ridges provided good shelter, streams for the water, and then the white settlers came in the 1700s. By 1942, there were 1,000 farms and 3,000 people living in the communities. So that kind of sets the stage for that. The communities that were here, Robertsville, Scarborough, New Bethel, Wheat, New Hope, and Elza was just a railroad stop. They'd actually been created because they were in the 1920s putting that tunnel through Black Oak Ridge for the railroad. But at any rate, that's where that's where the communities were that were here prior to the Manhattan Project. Now, I started out by talking about the Revolutionary War soldiers in Anderson County. And this is a plaque that is located in Clinton. And it does have a large list of Revolutionary War veterans who lived in Anderson County. You can find some of the names that will be that would cause you to recognize some places like the Joseph and Micah Frost. That makes you think of Frost Bottom over on and David Hall, the David Hall cabin that's out near the Bull Run steam plant. And then the Roberts, people with the last name Roberts, that obviously had to do with Robertsville, Douglas Oliver, just some names that kind of jump out at you as names that are identified with the early history of the area. Now, at the time of the Revolutionary War, areas like Tennessee were largely unsettled, just a few outlying posts and forts. But these Revolutionary War soldiers received grants of land in these frontier areas. Many of them had formative roles in the expansion of the United States, including the founding and development of the state of Tennessee. So in the Treaty of the Holston, which was signed on July the 1st, 1791, the Cherokee Nation retained the lands from the Powell Valley southward, including what became Robertsville. The Yuchi tribe lived along the Clinch River, and that time what's now Tennessee was part of what was known as the Southwest Territory. Now, white settlers were settling in this land in violation of that treaty. The state of North Carolina, in order to pay the debts to their soldiers, opened lands beyond the Appalachian Mountains for settlement. Approximately 200,000 acres of land in East Tennessee were surveyed and opened for settlement. Some of it was in violation to those treaties. Now, within what became Robertsville, 4 tracts of land were surveyed. A 640-acre tract, a 1,000-acre tract, a 3,000-acre tract, and then another 3,000 acre. And the grantors sold that land to the incoming settlers. Now, this surveyed land was still in Cherokee territory, and those early settlers arrived here before 1798, bought land that didn't have a clear title to it.
So,
now, the first settler,
Ray, let me ask you a question. So, you're saying that North Carolina was granting this land to those Revolutionary War soldiers, even though the land was not theirs to grant. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. You remember North Carolina actually at one point, this part of East Tennessee was a part of North Carolina.
Right.
In fact, they were. So they were just using it to get this debt taken care of to these soldiers. Mm-hmm. And they didn't really know where the land was, and I don't think they much cared.
Do you know how much land was given to each soldier?
I'm not sure. There are varying amounts, but the number 600 acres sticks in my mind, but I wouldn't want to be quoted on that.
Right.
Here's acres of land that stretched along the Clinch River from Pilot Knob to East Elza. That's the Worthington and the Tennell families. That's where they settled. And then in 1797, he was given a 6-month license to trade with the Cherokee. Now, William Tennell owned a massive estate located in Buckhorn Valley. Now, that lie on the north side of Oak Ridge, that's over where Marlow is now. And that Tennell farm is still over there, even today. French and British ancestry, the Tennells were certainly influential in the early history of Robertsville. And by 1795, the Jones Peak families, and you're going to see a little later on that there's a Peak cemetery. And they owned about 900 acres in Gamble Valley. And it was still owned by the family when it was condemned in 1942. Other early arrival, another one was the Oliver family, Richard Oliver, and he came in 1795, settled in what's today Oliver Springs. And his father, Douglas, settled in what was Robertsville before the Manhattan Project. And he was the largest land baron in that area. Now, by 1797, the Emory Road, which was actually cut through in 1787, but by 97, it was coming right through what would become Robertsville, connected this area of what's now East Tennessee to what's now Nashville. It was the French Lick back then. And it became a connection to the outside world. The Emory Road was in a strategic location. Prior to the 1798 treaty, it stayed clear of Cherokee lands, passing through what would become Robertsville, went up Black Oak Ridge, right across by modern day Hilltop, on over to Wartburg. Now, this is the bridge that is there today, that is right between the high school and the Midtown Community Center, the Oak Ridge History Museum. And there's the historical marker that's right alongside the road. You can see the History Museum in the background there. And that Rock Pillar Bridge was built in about 1900 and placed on the road at that time. So that was an early road coming right through what's now Oak Ridge. So after the Treaty of Tellico in 1798, the Emory Road took a more southwesterly route toward Kingston. It branched off, and the crossroads became known as Robertsville. And then the East Fork Baptist Church was formed. So although this church was located outside Robertsville, it served the community, and representatives were sent to the Holston Baptist Conference. It served the entire area. This small, rural, nameless community began to take on more significance. These are the land grants you were talking about, and obviously some of these people got lots more land than we were talking about earlier, and I just really don't know how you determined how much each one would get. And I think they were buying some additional land from William Blunt and Richard Henderson. Mm-hmm. So these large plots of land that make up the area, middle of Oak Ridge now, you see the Clinch River and Lee Ford there. That's where the Emory Road came across. And then there's Pine Ridge and Chestnut Ridge. Mm-hmm. And it shows the starting of East Fork of Poplar Creek right in the middle of what's Y-12 today.
Yeah.
But anyway, those are the land grants that were there and in what became Robertsville. Now, these are just some links that I included that you might be able to learn more about the Revolutionary War people who were in Tennessee and the pension records. And my good friend Bill Carey wrote an excellent article in the Tennessee Magazine about Revolutionary War veterans buried all over Tennessee. So he took the entire state and identified many of the locations where Revolutionary War veterans are buried. A really good article. I highly recommend anyone who's interested in those Revolutionary War veterans. Bill did an enormous amount of research, and I would highly recommend that Tennessee Magazine article to you. Now, let's talk now about the Oak Ridge cemeteries. After laying just a little bit of area history, these cemeteries, there are over 70 that are in the city limits of Oak Ridge. Many of them are located on the government reservation, but a lot of them are in the city of Oak Ridge. And most of them have been maintained. There's some that have been allowed to to grow up, and in many cases there are no markers there, no tombstones. So it's hard to keep enough interest in them to keep them maintained. There is a list available, all of them. I had a young man that was an Eagle Scout, and he took on his Eagle Scout project to identify the location of all of those cemeteries in Oak Ridge. I got him access up to Y12 and the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and took him to all of the locations of cemeteries inside the reservation. And he put down the GPS locations for all of them, and they're included in that list at the Oak Ridge Public Library of the Oak Ridge Cemetery. So this link will take you to a listing of all of the 70 plus cemeteries, and you'll find GPS coordinates for the location of all those cemeteries. Now, these are the historically speaking columns that I mentioned to you that Dennis Ebert wrote and Fred Eiler. And here are the links that you can get to my online archives of all of the historically speaking columns that I've written. Keith, I started writing them in 2006.
Yeah.
So there's a long list of them out there on that archive. But these two written in looks like November of no, it must have been January of 2021. Those that we're drawing from today. Now, let's talk about the one resting in Oak Ridge cemeteries. There's at least 10 Revolutionary War veterans that are in these cemeteries. 3 of them established farms along the East Fork Poplar Creek in what is in downtown Oak Ridge today. 3 others had farms along the bottomlands of the Clinch River. And one along Poplar Creek further down in Roane County. And then there was a large plantation in what's now downtown Oak Ridge. And another one that lived just outside the reservation boundary. And you'll recognize that as the cemetery going out toward Clinton. That's on the right, just up at the top of the hill there, the Cross Cemetery. Now, then there's one that we're not exactly where he lived. But let's get on to them. First one we'll talk about is Lieutenant Thomas Jones. And not much is known about him except he was from Virginia. And he started out as a supply officer. And he's an original pioneer settler, arrived here in around 1795, owned over 100 acres along the East Fork of Poplar Creek in what is today downtown Oak Ridge. And here's the connection. His youngest daughter married Jacob Peak in Virginia, and the Jones and the Peaks probably traveled to East Tennessee as a family group. Jacob Peak went on to own 400 acres in Gamble Valley, and his land adjoined Thomas Jones' land. In 1815, Thomas Jones died, and because of the proximity of his land to Jacob Peak's land and the marriage to his daughter, it's very probable that he's buried in the Peak family cemetery located in Gamble Valley. Now, again, there are no markers, no tombstones. So it just seems natural that that's where he would be buried by being such a part of the Peak family.
Mhm.
Still in existence in Oak Ridge. Only 2 tombstones can be found there, but other graves are recognized by field stones or by depressions in the earth, and it's still in existence today.
And where is that,
And
Ray, exactly?
that'd be over in Scarborough.
Okay.
I forget the name of the street. It's right on the corner.
Hmm.
Can't get the name of the street, but it's on the southwest portion of the Scarborough community.
Okay.
William Griffith, another Virginian who settled here, came from Franklin County, and he was in the Virginia militia in 3 separate engagements, and he refused to apply for his Revolutionary War pension.
Hmm.
But in 1952, his son documented in an affidavit that his father said he could live well without a pension, and he'd rather that his government would have his services so that in any future war she might be better able to feed and clothe her army. So he refused his, but his wife did apply for a widow's pension. And without her sworn testimony, we wouldn't have the details of William's military service. So he came here in about 1796, 1,100 acres, and was mostly just outside the reservation between Oak Ridge and Oliver Springs. Now he's buried in his father-in-law, where the cemetery where his father-in-law was buried, and he may also be buried there. William married Jones's daughter Susanna. And his burial is the best example of a documented burial of a Revolutionary War soldier in Oak Ridge. His son stated that he was buried in the Peak Cemetery. So again, that's the one we've been talking about. That's over in the Scarborough area. Now talk about Douglas Oliver. He was a private again in Virginia, and he marched against the British at Potomac, James and York River, an extensive amount of service, as you can tell. And he participated in campaigns against the Native America. And some of those were hard fights, I'm sure. He settled in Oak Ridge, and what became Oak Ridge. But the reason that they think he left Virginia is because he's not in that tax record. So by 1795-97, he was in East Tennessee and had purchased some 350 acres of land in what's now Oak Ridge. They had 10 children. He became one of the wealthiest, most prominent citizens in that area. Now, just prior to his death in 1843, he owned over 1,200 acres, and it includes the swimming pool, the Oak Ridge High School, the portion of the Oak Ridge Municipal Complex. All of the area in the middle of town was owned by Douglas Oliver at one time. He owned, if not the largest, one of the largest legal moonshine stills in the county. The spring that fed his still is the same spring that feeds the huge municipal swimming pool today. Upon his death, one creditor owed his estate for 50 gallons of moonshine. He died in 1843, and in likelihood was buried near his house on a small knoll that he owned. And that is a tract of land that is believed to be buried was sold to the Peck family. And it continued to be used as a family burial site. And it's still there today, the Peck family cemetery. And remember, don't get confused with Peak and Peck.
Right.
Let's talk about Henry Nunley. He was drafted into service in Virginia again and served at the siege of Yorktown. And he was there when they surrendered to actually end the Revolutionary War. Unfortunately, we know very little about him, only that in 1803 he owned 100 acres on East Fork of Poplar Creek. And in 1809 he sold his land and wasn't in the census bureaus. He's missing from the record. However, he did apply for a Revolutionary War pension in 1832 while living here in this area. In 1807, his wife died, leaving him with one son who moved to Arkansas, two daughters. And where he lived in this period of time is unknown. It's hard to trace it down. His two daughters married local men, John Scarborough, son of Patriot William Scarborough, and Charles Oliver, son of Douglas Oliver. They think this Henry Nunley may have been living there in 1830 by the name of this individual. They didn't list the names evidently, but the age applies appropriately to how old Henry would have been. No information on his final resting place. He may have been living with his daughter and son-in-law, and he could be buried in the Peck Cemetery, which was also used by his in-laws. So again, while we're tracing these people down, and Dennis did a lot of work on trying to find these individuals. In some cases, we were not able to pin them down. Samuel Worthington. Now, the Worthington Cemetery is on the east end of town, out near Elza, and he's known to have provided beef to the Continental Army. And then he was one of the first pioneers to settle in this area in 1792. In 95, he purchased 640 acres owned by William Russell, who was the territorial governor, and land speculator William Blunt. They signed the land deed, Blunt signing as a witness, and it's located on the northernmost area of what's now Oak Ridge and followed the northern boundary of the Clinch River from Pilot Knob to beyond Elza. Now, the Clinch River was the border of the reservation at that time. He was living on the land long before he purchased it. Just across the river from Samuel's property was a Cherokee Indian settlement. And in 97, he was given license to trade with them for 6 months. The land on the side of the Clinch River where Worthington settled was not formally ceded to the U.S. government until 1798. Maybe Russell and Blunt were selling land without clear title. Samuel died in 1821, probably buried in the Worthington Cemetery, and his exact plot is unknown. There's no tombstone. However, the Worthington Cemetery is a historic cemetery on TVA property within the city of Oak Ridge. This map kind of gives you, I know it's hard to read on this screen, small screen, but if you make a screenshot of it, you might be able to blow it up and print it, but it gives you a better idea of where those cemeteries are actually located and lists where these farms were and where the cemeteries are. So it's a good reference. We put it in the articles in the historically speaking column, and that's an aid that you can use if you're just trying to figure out exactly where they were. This is the one that marks the Peak Cemetery that we talked about in Scarborough. This is what it looks like. It's just a little knoll there, a little. They try to keep it cleared, but it has no only 2 tombstones there, and this was the original marker that was put up there when they were identifying the cemeteries back in the early 40s. And this is the Peck Cemetery, which is located behind St. Stephen's Episcopal Church. Again, this one is better maintained because it's in an area that is very close to the church there. Now let's talk about Joseph England. He served 4 tours in the North Carolina militia, and then engaged in battles along that. Dennis says he's another enigma. Very little is known about where he lived. After his wife died, he moved to Anderson County in 1827, lived with Alfred, his son. The 1830 census revealed that he had 10 individuals living with him. His final pension payment was in 1834. And they believe research done by the Daughters of the American Revolution reveals that his final resting place is in the Worthington Cemetery. No marker nor location of his exact grave. I just moved some. Didn't mean to. Drummer boy William Cross is the next one we'll talk about. He entered service in 1776 at about 14 or 15 years old as a drummer boy. And he even enlisted in a second tour. He moved from Knox County to Anderson County, where he bought 174 acres along East Fork Poplar Creek at the Pine Ridge Gap that now separates the city of Oak Ridge from Y-12 National Security Complex. So that was the area he owned. He had a large family, and in 1844, all of that estate was divided among his 11 heirs. And they identify another son of William Cross. Now, let me see here. All right, now this finishes Cross. And a question about all these siblings and then when they were born. Dennis wondered about where he's really buried and all of this, and couldn't actually pin it all down. But regardless, he lived, and he's honored with a marker at the Britton Cross Historic Family Cemetery. It's located on Highway 95, just beyond the Oak Ridge city limits going toward Clinton. And there's a good prominent marker there. I should have made a picture of it, but I didn't. Anyway, John, now let's talk about James Scarborough. And these brothers came in here and settled over in what's now has a historical marker over there as Scarborough. And they were involved in a lot of fighting, looks like, with the Native Americans. Battle of Point Pleasant. All right, let's get to this. In 1803, they settled here along Bethel Valley region along the Clinch River. So they had 600 acres, 400 more, and they established a rural community first known as Livewell. Lick Skillet, another source says, but then it was changed to Delray, and then to Scarborough Town, then Scarborough, and now we've shortened it to Scarborough, spelling it differently with Scarboro. And that name that was on that little community out there stayed with the school that was there during the Manhattan Project and after the Manhattan Project, and is actually still there today. a part of Oak Ridge Associated University's South Campus. But when the Black students that were there moved that school over to Gamble Valley, they brought the name of the school, Scarborough School, with them. And that became the name of the community. That's how the community of Scarborough, that's located in Gamble Valley, got its name. It's when they moved that school over there in 1949, they brought the name with it. But anyway, back to the original settlements. This is where James and William settled along that creek. And they owned an inn or an ordinary, and that had a ferry that crossed into Clinch River, or across the Clinch River, about where the old Solway Bridge stood and where the new one is today. Ferry boat operator, innkeeper, they were high status in the area. And William gave an acre of land to build the Bethel Episcopal Methodist Church meeting house. It's probably located where the old Scarborough School stands today. But they're buried in that Scarborough Community Cemetery that's out there, most likely buried there. And they would have set aside a piece of their property to be used as a final resting place, not just for their family, but for the communities. And sometimes they were located with churches and sometimes they weren't. Now, they found a deed dated in 1942 when the Army purchased the land, but they didn't find anything earlier. The Scarborough Cemetery Monument reveals it was founded in 1832, and they think that's based on the earliest tombstone. James Scarborough died in 1809 and William in 1830, so they're very likely buried there as well. Okay. The old elementary school is still there today. Now, Elias Roberts, not a lot known about him either, but he and Zacchaeus Roberts volunteered and served in the war. And then they were at the Charleston, South Carolina battle, and they were captured. Says this debacle is the worst American defeat of the war. After the war, Elias and Zacchaeus met and married sisters, Nancy and Rebecca Brashears, while living in South Carolina. Then they moved in 1794 into a Roane County area, purchased some 500 acres along Poplar Creek. And this is an area that actually became the K-25 gaseous diffusion plant. They established their farm there, raised their children, and continued to operate the farm even after Elias's death. And the younger Roberts descendants would go swimming on the shore of the creek around that family cemetery. The swimming hole became known as Granny's Bluff. And eventually the land was sold outside of the Roberts family. And in 1942, the Army purchased the entire region for the Manhattan Project. When they surveyed the area, they could only identify the location of the cemetery by informants. In other words, there's no markers there, nothing to identify it as being a cemetery. All the headstones and fieldstones were missing. That's because a previous owner had thoughtlessly removed the gravestones and converted the cemetery into pasture land. So after the government acquired the land, they began building the K-25 constructions of the site. The K-31 building actually is the one that's built on the area that was built on the area that was the cemetery. And the site has been deactivated now and it's been cleaned up, but it's now the East Tennessee Technology Park. But Roberts is buried in that vacant field nearby Poplar Creek. And he continues to be honored by Roberts Family Memorial that's been erected in George Jones Presbyterian Church. No, that's not Presbyterian. It's a Baptist church in the historic cemetery located near the Wheat community. Now, let me show you. This is the marker that's in the George Jones Memorial Baptist. And you know, Keith, I just learned something, and I didn't know it at the time I was writing this. You know the difference between a cemetery and a graveyard?
No.
Bet you don't. I didn't either. But a cemetery is a series of graves that's located independent of a church.
Oh, is that right?
A graveyard is a place of burial located in conjunction with a church.
Huh.
So if there's a church there, it's a graveyard. If there's not a church there, it's a cemetery. Now, that's a mistake that I put in this slide and didn't know at the time. I've learned since then that that's the difference between a cemetery and a graveyard. Now, let's go back to this conclusion. Except for drummer boy William Cross and Elias Roberts, no memorials exist for our Revolutionary War soldiers and patriots who are buried within the Oak Ridge Reservation. We've identified where many of them likely are, but there are no headstones. Only the one for Cross, William Cross, out on the east end of town, and now the one on the west end of town at the Wheat Church to recognize Elias Roberts. And we only have our best guess at their final resting places. They lived and died here. They certainly would have been buried nearby, and the marriage of their children. So there's enough evidence to say that we are aware that they were buried here. And again, most graves in the early 1800s are just marked by field stones. The immediate family would know where they were, but and they might pass it on to their next generation. But by about the third generation, that information would be lost. So not more information exists for Revolutionary War heroes other than what we've been able to dig up today. Now, I have one more Revolutionary War soldier to talk about. This one's not in Oak Ridge. This is Joseph Greer, and he's down where I grew up in Middle Tennessee, just outside of the little community of Petersburg. And he was reportedly a giant of a man who fought at Kings Mountain and was chosen to deliver the news of the victory at Kings Mountain to Congress. And his journey, most on foot from the Southern Appalachians to Philadelphia, was treacherous. At least on one occasion, he hid in a hollow log to avoid being captured by the enemy. When he got to Congress Hall, the sergeant at arms tried to block his way, keep him from entering the chamber. He pushed the officer aside, announcing to Congress that an army of frontiersmen had crushed Patrick Ferguson's Tory army at Kings Mountain. And George Washington is reportedly have said, with soldiers like him, no wonder the frontiersmen won. Greer is buried near Petersburg in Lincoln County, and the site's in condition. It's not easy to find, but it is in good condition. And he was granted that land on where he's buried now as a part of his Revolutionary War service. Again, the two references, I'll end with that. If you want to look into more detail, here are the links to the historically speaking columns that I used to prepare this presentation.
All right. Very good.
Well, we got it done, didn't we?
I didn't do much except sit here and listen. You got it done.
Yeah, I did research either. I again credit Dennis Seegert and Fred Eiler. They did a world of research to dig that information up.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is, as time goes on, there's only, and we didn't have the record keeping back then that we have. So little bits and pieces that we get, sometimes that's all we're going to get. So
That's it. And if it's not documented to where future generations can easily get it, they're not going to do the digging Dennis did. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's the reason that it's so important for projects like you and I have been involved in, like the oral histories and things such as that. So we will have a permanent record in 100 years from now. People can go back and look at that record. So absolutely
right.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you, Ray. Who do we have? Do we have anybody scheduled coming up?
We do. I was fortunate enough to be involved with the Medal of Honor recipients convention in Knoxville here a few weeks ago, months now. And one of them wanted to come back, Kyle Carpenter. Kyle is the youngest living Medal of Honor recipient. He had his incident in Afghanistan in 2010. And he was very interested in Oak Ridge, and he wanted to come back. And he also has a podcast that he's doing on a fairly regular basis. And he wanted to do a podcast on the Manhattan Project. So the people that he was talking to said, well, you need to talk to Ray Smith. So he did, and I gave him a tour. We took him inside Y-12 and took him over to the graphite reactor. And then we sat down in the New Hope Center there in the John Guggen Library, and we talked for an hour about the Manhattan Project. And that podcast, he told me the other day, that podcast has been listened to in 26 countries.
Wow.
So it's a kind of spread that we have. So Kyle agreed, and because I did an interview with him, he said he'd be glad to do an interview with us. Okay. So we're going to have and let him talk to us about his podcast and other things that he's doing. I mean, he's busy all the time with veterans associated activities and things to do with the Medal of Honor Society. So I'm just glad that he's going to give us a little bit of time, and we'll let him tell us what's going on in his life now. And so he'll be our next guest.
And that'll be a great one for us to kind of wrap up the year with, wrap up 2022, and then we can hit it again after the first of the year. So that would be good. So
this is kind of a habit, Keith. I think, we started this back in February of 2020 when we couldn't do a podcast because of COVID.
Yep.
But I really like the format. I think we've got onto something here that works well.
Yeah, I do too. All right, Ray. Well, thank you very much. And folks, thanks for watching. We appreciate it. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.